a fantastic presentation from Mike and Vicky. Am I right in saying that? Yes, about the subject of special needs and disability. Am I right in saying that? Great. Okay, good. So just to say that this part of the program is a little bit interactive. So I'm hoping that you will communicate with me in some way, either by unmuting or you can put something in the chat. Either way, I don't mind. But I've got just two questions for you. That's all. The first one I'm going to share with you in a minute. But I suppose the first one really is a kind of, let's see, a review of last week. I'm interested to hear what responses I'm going to get back. So I'm going to first of all share my screen. There we go. Can you all see that? Is that visible to everybody? Good job, good job, good job. All right, so let's go to the first question. What comes to your mind when you think about the word disability? Just either call it out. I'm going to write them down here. Anything, just unmute and write the word and just let me know what comes to your mind. Okay.
Not able to do something.
Okay, not able. Thank you. Anyone else? Is anybody putting stuff in the chat? Let me have a look. Someone who needs support. Okay. Anything else? Do speak to me.
A difference.
Difference. Okay. Maybe one more. Oh, yes, somebody's putting something. Disability means that you cannot do something. Okay. Cannot do something.
Differently abled.
Differently abled. Thank you, Mike. Maybe one more. Elaine, I can see you're itching to say something there.
I would say it's sort of needing assistance with some
Needing assistance.
Yeah, daily
Lovely.
Activities or yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone who's contributed. So I'm going to read back what you said. So not able to do something, someone who needs support, somebody who's differently abled, someone who cannot do something, someone who's need. So what sense are you getting from those responses that have come back? Everybody's very quiet. You will have a chance to be quiet in a minute. Any responses? You had a program with Mike and Vicky. What sort of things with the words that came back just now? The sense that I get often is from the words that you've shared. Somebody says they can't do something, needing of help or needing of support, etc. Those are the sort of things that come to our mind when we think about disability. Am I right in saying that? And what tends to come up the first often is wheelchairs. People often think about a wheelchair. But I'm sure a lot of you know that only 10% of people that have disability use a wheelchair. One of the things that I suppose I like to start my programs with is for us to think about how we see people with disability, because the way that we see them will determine the way that we will relate to them. I'm hoping you agree. There are different ways. There's some of you may have heard of this model called the medical model, which sees disabled people that they're the ones they need fixing, or they need care, or they need charity. We need to help them. People become very dependent and lose their dignity. And commonly, this is a model that's commonly used in healthcare practices and some churches as well. The model that, let's see if I can move on here. Another model that some of you may also be familiar with is referred to as a social model. Now, this model suggests that it's the things around us that make people disabled. So in this picture here, you can see that this lady is using a motorized chair, and to get into the building, she obviously has a ramp so she can get in. So this model, the social model, suggests that it's the systems around that make people to be to cause them to be disabled. So what this model says is that if things like policies are changed, attitudes are changed, change the economic discrimination against disabled people, then people with disability can have better access. when you put the two models together, you'll see that one model, the medical model, says that her impairment is the problem and that they should cure her or give her a prosthetic. Whereas the social model says that it's the stairs that are the problem and that they should change, obviously put a ramp, and that will make it easier for her to access. So the medical model often looks at limitations. We see, first of all, the limitation of the person. We want to change them to be like everyone else. And this results in disabled people being seen as dependent. This is called the medical model. But when you compare it to the social model, it focuses on the effect that society, when it changes its poor environments or it looks at issues of marginalization, it results in people being independent. Are you following me on this? I'm assuming you are. Yes, I can see Robin shaking his head. Good, I'll keep going, because at least as long as Robin's shaking his head, I'm good to go. And then we look at this model, which is referred to as the interdependency model. As we are drawn into relationship with our Creator, we are drawn towards one another. We are drawn into community. We are made for relationships. We all need each other, made for community. So here's another model called the interdependency model. It is important to recognize that, of course, we were built to be in community. And then the model that I think we're going to be looking at a lot, Nigel will be looking at a little bit more later, is referred to as the medical model. I just wanted to, not medical, sorry, the theological model. I just wanted to show you what the Bible says about disability. If you've got a camera, you might want to take a picture of this slide. I find that it's really helpful when you think about what some biblical themes that come up when we think about disability in the Bible. That we're all made in the image of God. The Lord looks at the heart in Samuel's. Psalms 139 verse 14 is one of my favorites. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. John 9 verse 1-3, disability is not the result of personal sin. And that one, if you can remember, I remember very, very clearly when our son Matthew was born with disability. There were times when actually we were made to feel that there was something that we had done, and if we prayed hard enough, things would be much better. But actually John 9 says differently. 1 Corinthians 12:12-22, every Christian has a role to play. 2 Corinthians 12:5-10, God's power is made perfect in weakness. And Galatians 3 verse 28, all are equal in Christ. So moving on then, very quickly, I'm going to move on from that slide. I often ask myself, what's the point? Why do we need the ministry for people? I think the church is now calling it possibility ministry. Have you heard of the new change in the title, possibilities ministry, suggesting that everybody has possibility, and that's perfectly true. But the question one often asks is, why do we need the ministry? Well, there are over 1 billion people living in the world living with disability. 13 million, I think that figure, maybe Mike and Vicky can tell me whether that's right or whether that's gone up in the UK. 1 in 10 children live with a disability. And it's suggested that people with disability are the poorest, the least educated, have least access. And this is the last two, I think, are the key ones, have least opportunity for you to be evangelized or to be part of it, and have the lowest church involvement. So I always, when I think about those issues and I think about our attitude to people living with disability and the attitude generally, and those of you who have been following the fact that ASNA, our charity, is now 20 years this year. We've been celebrating it really through a number of things, one of which is we have been interviewing 20 leaders within our church and within the ministry that have impacted the ministry of disability, both of ASNA and also just the ministry in general. And we spoke last week with a gentleman called Dan Vanderplatz, and he shared with us these 5 stages of changing attitudes to disability. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't heard of it before, that you visit his website on the Elm Christian Services. But I think it's quite a good way of thinking about, where the state that you are, where are you in your understanding of people with disability, and most of all, how we're engaging with them. Are we still stuck in the medical model? Are we in the social model? How do we change our attitudes? How do we really think about people with disability? And I'm just going to show you the slide that actually puts them all together. Normally I do one by one, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. And he talks about the first stage being that of ignorance, and you can read through all of those. And it simply says that, weakness and disability are a sign that God either does not care or is not able to fix the situation. In fact, they may be a result of sin or a lack of faith, and you can go on and read the rest. And there are a number of people who are in that state. They do feel that they don't have any interest in people with disability. They don't know anyone with disability and don't want to. And I think it sometimes takes for people to move to the next stage when they come into contact with people with disability. The first thing that they tend to do is to pity. I feel sorry for people with disability. I'm too bad. It's too bad. I really don't see any meaning or purpose in their lives. And the more that people come into a relationship with people living with disability, they begin to start to care. But Dan goes on to say that we need to be moving on to stages of friendship and finally co-workers. And I think that's really important for us as Christians in our daily lives, as we meet people living with different that are differently able or with neurodiversities, that we appreciate that we all can be involved in ministry and mission. And so the last part of my presentation is looking at moving on from inclusion to belonging. And I feel very strongly about this because I feel with the word inclusion, it asks the question, who's doing the including? But when we think about belonging, there's something to me, there's something about belonging which has a major difference. And I think that's what we need to be trying to create within our churches, within our communities, a sense of belonging. And so I suppose you could understand belonging as being, it's said to be a human need, just like the need for food and shelter. Feeling that you belong is most important in seeing value in your life and in coping with intense, painful emotions. Some find belonging in a church, some with friends, some with families. And I suppose you could ask the question, is belonging important? And actually, well, maybe I could ask you, is belonging important? And what comes to your mind when you think about belonging? What comes to people's minds when you think about belonging? This is the second question that I said I would ask. Robin, only because I can see you. Any ideas? Just shout out any words that come to your mind, or someone's put something in the chat, I think. Let me check it. Yeah, security. I like that. Security. Anything else?
Feeling comfortable.
Comfortable. Oh, that sounds good.
I would say involvement.
Yep, involvement, like that. Involvement, feeling comfortable. Not the outcast. Rebecca's put on there. Security, Helly has put on there. You're not alone. Yep. Yep.
Being accepted.
Accepted. There's a good word there. Lovely. Accepted. Yeah. Any other words? Maybe a couple more that come to mind.
Valued.
Yes, valued. That's a brilliant one. All of the words that you're coming up with are brilliant. Another word that I'm hoping is going to come up, but just because of time, I'm not going to dwell too much. Yes, if other words come, please put them in the chat. A word that I always love to use is feeling like home. And most of all, being missed. When you're missed, someone really misses you, then you know that you belong there. Someone has your back. Yeah, like that one as well. Excellent. Good. So when we think about those words, when we think about our church, when we think about our community, we're thinking specifically about the church. When you think about all of those words, does our church reflect that? Does our church reflect those words, that people feel that they're at home, that they're cared for, that they are loved? Yes, excellent word there, Nawida. Loved is a key word there. Part of the crowd. Does your church actually feel that? Rhetorical question. Just going to move on a little bit more because I just wanted to share with you a few more slides. Specifically, this piece of work that was done by a chap called Eric Carter, fantastic author, if you get a chance to look at his work. And he talks about belonging. He says that young people with disabilities and their families want more than to be integrated or be included. They want experience of belonging. And he's come up with, and I won't spend too long on them. So he did a piece of work interviewing 500 young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families and carers. And he identified 10 dimensions that help in fostering a sense of belonging in faith communities. And he says that we foster belonging not through programs, but through relationships. And that's how belonging comes to pass. And so he comes up with these 10 dimensions, and I'm literally going to just whiz through them. Again, if you have your camera, take a picture of them. I think they really are quite sound. And he talks about presence. Belonging always begins with presence. If people are not there, then they can't belong. And yet so many of our communities, the primary barriers to belonging is simply the absence of people with disabilities, from worship, from learning, from services, from social activities, from all the things that make up congregational life. Then he talks about the second part, which is that people need to be invited. And when they're invited, they need to feel welcomed, and most of all, known. Then he says that part 3 is there's a sense, needs to be, and somebody mentioned this when we spoke about belonging, a sense of acceptance, feeling that they're supported and cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. So those are the 10 dimensions that he says people, when they experience this, they feel that they belong. And so the key factors in this creating sense of belonging is intentionality. You know, we have to make an intentional effort to ensure that people in our communities, in our churches, specifically people that are differently abled, have a sense of belonging. But this has to be something that we do intentionally. We need to pursue the best. We have to give it forethought and design everything with everyone in mind.
Okay. So just taking on from that, I love the idea of presence, because I've taken as a key verse 1 Corinthians 12, which talks about the body. And I was fascinated that this children's story was just on that very theme. So this presentation just looks at how do we, and I've entitled it No Vestigial Organs. Now, of course, Paul, when writing about the body, really overturned, first of all, our understanding of the importance of the head, because, of course, from the Romans and Greeks and even Babylonians, from Daniel 2, you know, everybody concentrated on the head. But he was determined that we look at the whole, the holistic body, and not just the head. We've got a very hierarchical society where we look at the head, but not at the integration of the whole. And so many of you will know what the term vestigial organ means, but these are examples. The definition of a vestigial organ is one which is smaller, which is smaller and simpler than those in related. They have lost or almost lost their original function. So this is our understanding, or this was the scientific understanding of vestigial organs. And I was trying to liken this to how we sometimes treat those who we believe are not part of the church, that they haven't got anything to contribute. And many of you will know, of course, that the result of vestigial, of having thinking of something that's lost its function, is that you remove it. It doesn't have a place. It doesn't have, as Carter would say, it doesn't have presence. And so these questions of vestigial organs and the body led me to ask the question, what do we conceive as church? And of course, the traditional understanding of church is that it's a collection of people who get together. But I found this really interesting, actually, that somebody would make a church or create a church in this place. So this church here that you see at 2,500 feet in Ethiopia is apparently the most inaccessible place to worship. It's perched on this vertical spire of a rock with sheer 6,650 feet drops on every side. And you can imagine when this was created, this wasn't created with a sense of all belonging, because of course those in wheelchairs, those who are older, those who haven't got limbs, would not be able to access this church. And so this was not thought of as a place, a collective place where all can worship. This was about those who were being able to worship. And so I wonder how many times, though, we may not have such inaccessible churches, But I wonder whether in our minds we have built places that are inaccessible for people to access. Maybe in our attitudes we have erected barriers, and we've erected steep 650 drops that those who are on the outside cannot enter in. And so I wanted us to think of how churches, of how we might erect church. And so what is church in the Bible comes from this Ecclesiastes. It means a called out people. It's always used referring to people. And we've had this text, and I, as I say, love the story. 1 Corinthians 12:18 says, but in fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. So I'm not sure whether there is somebody here in our congregation who we're speaking to on Zoom or on YouTube who hasn't felt, maybe you've felt a little bit like a vestigial organ, maybe not completely part of the church, maybe on the outside, maybe people have considered that your function is not as integral to the working of the church, to the betterment of God's kingdom as it should be. But this text reminds us that that God has arranged the parts in the body just as he wants to be. There are, as it were, no vestigial organs with God. And so the lesson from 1 Corinthians 12 for me is very, very clear, very simple. You are set there by God, despite of your ability or disability. You've been set there by God. And that should give you the affirmation that you need, the value set that you need to know that it's been God who has placed you there. The only head, we love having lots of heads, but actually the only head that Corinthians reminds us of the church is Christ. Everyone is needed in the church. Everyone is needed in the church. There are no vestigial organs. Everyone is needed. And we should therefore have, and will have, if we recognize this, a caring church. And so this is my favorite picture of Matthew, and we could talk whole of course a testimony about Matthew and about how he has helped, I think, us, Sophia and ourselves, but actually all the churches that we've been in, begin to understand what it means to include and belong. Challenging us to make sure that we understand what it means to include, that maybe even though Matthew can't preach, even though Matthew can't he can't go out and maybe knock on doors and do PM activities, but when he sits at the back of the church and he smiles and he joins in the singing and he kneels to pray, he is modeling what it is, I believe, to be a Christian. In his own way, he is showing to us and demonstrating to us that despite or in spite of our disabilities, you are part of that body, and that smile alone should enable you to know that he feels valued and loved by God. So the church, somebody wise, I think, said, the church that does not place the disabled at the center is itself disabled. If we do not place those who are disabled at the very center, that church is disabled. Maybe may not have people with disability, but maybe it is disabled in its thinking, disabled in its philosophy, disabled in its theology, because it has not placed those that God says belong. It has not placed them at the center. So 1 Corinthians 12:23 says, those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor, and our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. What a place that we still need to get to, that those that we think of who have less honor, that we bestow more honor. We give them the central place at the feast. We invite them first to the banqueting table. This is the call in 1 Corinthians 12:23. So church is a caring community. Well, I love this statement by Hubert Humphrey, who says that the moral test of myself, the moral test of Cheltenham Church, is how Cheltenham Church treats those who are in the dawn of life. That's the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the disabled. This is the moral test that each church, each individual faces, that we have, how we treat those who are considered to be on the outside, those who are considered by science, those who are considered by society, those who are considered by the elite to be vestigial organs. This is the moral test that each of us faces. And then, of course, because it's science, how wrong we were. Because even though there is no conflict, and I'm a scientist myself, no conflict between God, true science and God, but we thought that vestigial organs were smaller and simpler. We thought they had lost or almost lost their original function, and so in some cases we've cut them out. The appendix, for instance, I'm not sure how many of you, I can't see your faces, but many of us have had many of our vestigial organs removed, but we are now finding, and I love this quote, we are now finding a higher purpose for the appendix. So researchers have found that the appendix is designed to protect good bacteria in the gut. That way, when the gut is affected by a bout of diarrhea or other illnesses that cleans out the intestines, the good bacteria in the appendix can repopulate the digestive system. So the things that we thought, that were vestigial, the things that we thought that were on the outside, the things that we thought could not contribute to the whole, we are now, as a result of more thinking, more analysis, beginning to find that that's not the case. And my prayer is that we, as a result of more prayer and more understanding and more light, the people that we thought of in our communities, in our homes, in our churches, that we thought that didn't have anything to contribute, that were vestigial in a way, that we find that there is a higher purpose for them as well, as there is a higher purpose for all of us. And so the church, as I am closing, the church that does not place the disabled at the center is itself disabled. And part of the mission that we have as ASNA is to make sure that churches are enabled churches and not disabled, enabled in their thinking and outreach and holistic sense of belonging. So that our challenge and our prayer is your church a place? And I know it can be. Cheltenham Church can be a place where people really belong, where they feel fulfilled, and as a result, they begin that healing process that God wants for all of us. There are no vestigial organs. Everybody belongs. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, both of you. We're now going to have our final song, The Church Has One Foundation.